Good morning and welcome. Bear with me a couple of minutes. We are just trying to build up an audience. As you can see, we are operating remotely once again this morning. But yes, we are just building up an audience. If you are watching this feed, please do feel free to share it, tag people in, tag your associates in, tag your community in. The challenges we have with working remotely are this. Let's hope our connection remains for the full hour. We have a very, very, very important guest this morning, and it's promising to be a great show. Yes, I can see a couple of you sharing it already. Thank you very much. Good morning. Right, welcome to another show. The ZMC Network, a channel dedicated to bringing communities together. We've had some amazing guests over the past 18 months. We've had some amazing business owners from our region. We've had some leaders from our region, and we've had some people who've really given some very useful and important knowledge and shared their experiences. As you may well be aware, the UK is coming into the local elections, and on the 6th of May, we shall be voting for our next Metro Mayor. And we shall also be voting for the next Police and Crime Commissioner. This morning's guest, I'm very honoured to say, is the Labour candidate for the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner post. We were supposed to have Liam Byrne as well with us this morning, who's the Labour candidate for the Metro Mayor, but unfortunately he hasn't been able to join us this morning. But I'm very glad to say that we do have Simon Foster with us. And we'll be going through a bit about the role about the Police and Crime Commissioner. What is this role all about? What is this title? And what responsibilities come with this role? So, if you give me a second, I will introduce our guest this morning. Simon, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to speak with you and your viewers. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. Now, we were trying to get this done a couple of weeks back, and I had a tough problem. Then we had the unfortunate situation where we lost Prince Philip. Very unfortunate and very sad. And here we are today. So third time lucky. We've managed to make it happen. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, fantastic. As you say, third time we've had a couple of aborted attempts, but hopefully we're on track and ready to go this morning.
Fantastic. Right. If any of you can see us, please drop a comment into the comment section so that I know you are watching. And if you have any questions, and I'm sure there will be quite a few questions. If you have any questions, please do feel free to present them in the comment section. So, Simon, Police and Crime Commissioner. I think the only mention of commissioner that I ever knew was from Batman, and there was Commissioner Gordon. Apart from that, I don't think I've ever come across the term or ever met anybody who was a crime commissioner, or no, I've never understood what the actual role of commissioner is. So the Police and Crime Commissioner of the West Midlands, what is the role? What does it stand for?
Yes, Abid. I mean, you're not the first person to have mentioned Commissioner Gordon to me and the Batman connection, I have to say. But yeah, look, this is a role that was introduced back in 2012. It was a piece of legislation known as the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. So it's a relatively new role. Before then, we had to go all the way back to, 1964. The Police Act had set up the police committees, and they had kind of performed the role of supervision and monitoring of the police service between about 1964 and then right up to about 2012. The then Conservative government decided to legislate to alter that system. So we ended up with the Police and Crime Commissioner. So what is the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner? Well, first thing to remember, Abid, is that it's not about operational day-to-day policing, because that is the responsibility of the Chief Constable.
Okay.
It's about representing the people, not police. That's important because you're elected by people, democratically elected by them and directly accountable to the people. So you're representing the people, not the police. It's about democratic accountability. It's about making sure that we have an effective and efficient police service as far as the people of the West Midlands are concerned. And you have three, and it is more complex than this, but you have three basic functions. One is to prepare a police and crime plan that sets out the needs, priorities and objectives of the people as far as the policing service is concerned in the West Midlands. Two, set the police budget, and use the council tax precept, which is that part of your local council tax that goes towards paying for local policing. And thirdly, to hold the Chief Constable and the police service democratically to account on behalf of the people in the widest possible sense. That, in a nutshell, is the role of the Police and Crime Commission.
Fantastic. And it's very interesting you say that the role isn't about operational policing and it's more about strategy. And would it be fair to say that you are there to hold the police to account for their actions or the way they behave, or would that be more correct?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's rather more about strategy than operational day-to-day policing. Now, obviously, in reality, there's always room for interpretation as to exactly what that means, because plainly there will be some issues that are plainly operational day-to-day policing, and there are some issues that are, on the other hand, that are plainly strategic issues. But of course, in between there, that you will have a spectrum of matters in which sometimes issues around operational day-to-day policing and strategic issues will inevitably merge, and there will be grey areas as to where those boundaries properly fall, as between the relationship between the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Okay, fantastic. Now, it may seem that I'm being a bit rude because my attention is on three different screens. I'm trying to navigate the social media. My producer is also doing the social media, so please do bear with us as well. My attention is fully here, but I've got screens. I'm looking at Instagram and I'm looking at Facebook and YouTube, and I'm trying to get the engagement going. Okay. It's Sunday morning. It's Ramadan, and as you can imagine, our viewers predominantly of the BAME background, of the BAME community. It's Sunday morning, probably still asleep or just about waking up. So my apologies if you are waking up and tuning in. We have a fantastic guest with us this morning, Simon Foster, the Labour candidate for the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner role. And we're talking about the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, what their duties are all about, what they do to enforce the policing within our great region. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the comments, and please do also tag your colleagues, your friends, your associates, and please do share my post. Please do share my post. So Simon, have you been a serving police officer yourself?
I have not. No, my background, Abid, is that I've been a legal aid solicitor for 35 years, and yeah, so I've worked in the community, and I have worked in private practice. I was a partner in a legal aid law firm for 22 years, so I've got experience of running a business, got experience of working in the community. I've always represented the diverse communities of the West Midlands, always represent people rather than those in power.
So if you haven't been an operational police officer yourself, what qualifies you, or what gives you the background or the knowledge to actually stand for this particular role?
Well, remember, Abid, that being the Police and Crime Commissioner is not about operational day-to-day policing. It's about setting strategy. Operational day-to-day policing is, of course, the responsibility of the Chief Constable. Remember that the vast majority of police and crime commissioners up and down the country, and I mean we've got 43. Obviously, in London, the role of the Metro Mayor and the Police and Crime Commissioner is merged, as it is in Manchester. But everywhere else, there are directly elected and directly accountable police and crime commissioners. The vast majority of police and crime commissioners do not come from a policing background, so always worth bearing that in mind. I mean, what I would say in terms of what I'm able to bring to the role is, number one, I believe in the fundamental importance of local democratic accountability. Number two, it's a real opportunity to work with the police service in relation to those issues that concern justice, safety and security for the people and community of the West Midlands. And thirdly, what I would say is that I've got 35 years as a legal aid solicitor, a professional and practical experience of holding public bodies like the police to account on behalf of the people.
Okay. Now, particularly, I mean, I'll talk about the West Midlands because that's our region. I mean, the increase of crime, particularly with gang crime and knife crime, and I've been working in the public sector now for the past 4 years, and I've worked very closely with the current police and crime commissioner, tackling youth crime, youth violence. Although statistics may suggest that maybe it's lowering, to the general public, it wouldn't seem that way. Every time you turn on your social media, you hear about somebody being stabbed. Every time you turn on your social media, there's been a gang incident somewhere, or there's been a shooting incident somewhere. Do you believe that the current strategy that's been in place is actually working? Has it been effective?
Plainly, the youth violence and organised gang-related crime and violence in general, and in particular knife crime, is a matter of huge public concern, and quite rightly so. As you say, when there are tragic incidents of violence and knife crime, plainly it attracts a lot of public attention and concern. What I would say is that it's often said, isn't it, the first duty of government is to keep its people safe and secure. Now, sadly, I would say that central government in particular has fallen down on the job in relation to that. It's clearly in breach of that fundamental duty, because, as you say, in terms of violent crime and in particular knife crime, there have certainly been significant increases over that period of time. We have to look at the reasons why that has happened to begin with, because obviously, unless we understand why it's happened, we can't decide what we need to do to put it right. Now, one of the reasons that there's been a surge in violence has been the significant cuts to policing over the last 10 years. In the West Midlands, we lost £175 million of our budget. We lost 2,221 of our police officers. That was 25% of our police officers in the West Midlands. We lost many hundreds of essential police staff, 300 police community support officers. Community policing was dismantled in the West Midlands. We had 1,800 community police officers in 2010. By 2018, we had 700. Okay, so we lost over 50% of our community police officers in the West Midlands. Now, plainly, as has been acknowledged by the Home Office, that contributed to the surge in violent crime. That's incontrovertible. The Home Office has acknowledged that. Now, it's true that the Conservative government attempted to suppress that inconvenient truth, but that is the fact of the matter. Now, secondly, have a look at the cuts in youth services. The All-Party Parliamentary Group on Knife Crime found a strong association between the areas that had suffered the highest rates in cuts to youth services had experienced the highest rates in increases in knife crime. There was a strong association between that. That's catalogued in the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Knife Crime report. And of course, in the West Midlands, we have disproportionately suffered cuts to youth services. About 82% cuts to youth services in the West Midlands between 2010 and 2018. That is two good examples of why we have experienced this catastrophic and devastating increase in violence, and in particular in knife crime. So there are two of the issues. Now, what we need to do in order to put that right is, number one, we need to invest in community policing, because we need proactive,
I mean,
preventative.
on that point right there, I mean, as I was growing up in Birmingham, there was a lot of police stations. And very similar to the banking situation at the moment, where where the banks are closing their branches down, and we're all being encouraged to go online and do our banking, which the older generation totally despises. In the same way, police stations everywhere now are being shut down and converted into places of worship or converted into restaurants. With a lack of presence of an actual police station, do you not feel that this has gone some way in the increase or people being more fearless of the law?
I think the two of the most significant consequences that have contributed to the increase in violent crime, youth violence and knife crime, has been the cut in police officer numbers. That's the link that has been acknowledged between that and the increase in violence by the Home Office. Number two, cuts in youth services. As I explained, we had about 82% cuts in youth services across the West Midlands. Very direct relationship between that and rises in knife crime. I'll come on to the police stations in a second, but I mean, I would just say that's why I'm pledging 450 extra community police officers out on the streets to keep people safe and secure. We need visible, proactive, preventative, problem-solving community police officers. And I mean police officers, we're not talking police community support officers here, out on the streets keeping people and communities safe, number one. And I'm committed to working with who I hope will be a Labour Metro Mayor in order to restore youth services in the West Midlands, because that is an absolutely fundamentally important part of the strategy, and put youth in neighbourhoods. We need to stop school exclusions, really important. We need to improve safeguarding. We need to invest in violence reduction unit, so we're focusing on prevention, early intervention and the underlying cause of crime. And of course, we need joint working between the police, communities, the public sector, because it's only together that we can prevent violence, protect young people and save lives. Now, I've just come on to, I'll address the police station point head on here, Abid. First thing to remember is that the current Conservative government does not believe in, is not prepared to invest in local police stations. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The reason that 600 police stations have had to close throughout the country, 600 over the last 10 years or so. The reason for that is because of cuts to policing over the years. As I say, in the West Midlands, we had £175 million cut in policing. We lost 25% of our police officers, many hundred of essential police staff. That is the main reason police stations have had to close. Okay, and of course, let's not forget that those cuts were all voted for and supported by many of those Conservative MPs and supporters, and indeed candidate and the Police and Crime Commissioner candidate, who are now complaining about the consequences of the cuts they themselves, frankly, supported. Okay. Number two, we have a Prime Minister who, when he was Mayor of London back in 2013, decided to close 65 police stations himself, because he said they were no longer part of his thinking any longer. Thirdly, when he came to the West Midlands, 26th of July 2019, he ruled out any further investment for police stations in the country, because he said he considered them no longer value for money. So the reality of all this is that we've had police and crime commissioners up and down the country, doesn't matter whether they're Conservative police and crime commissioners or Labour police and crime commissioners, who've been forced to choose between frontline policing and keeping open empty buildings. Now, we know that the current Conservative policing minister, Kit Malthouse, has, as a condition of the current police uplift, also stipulated in the comprehensive spending review statement that was issued in December that the Conservative government want more cuts to police stations at the moment. Okay, they want more cuts to the police estate. That is the reality of the situation. And we said around this issue that if the Conservatives have a pledge around police stations, as they do in the West Midlands, they've got 3 fundamental questions to answer about that. One, how much is it going to cost? They haven't answered that question. Number two, where is the money going to come from? They haven't answered that question. Number three, what are the knock-on financial cost consequences of keeping open police stations at the moment? All right, in terms of its impact on frontline policing and its impact on the investment in that part of the current police estate that's going to be written. There have been no answers to any of those questions that have been forthcoming. My position is clear. I will always prioritise investment in frontline policing, police officers, because at the end of the day, it's police officers out on the streets that keep people safe and secure, not empty buildings. And the reality is that people will have a very clear choice on the 6th of May. With a Labour candidate, they can have 450 extra community police officers out on the streets keeping them safe.
Yeah.
With a Conservative candidate, the reality is hundreds of fewer frontline police officers in order to fund empty buildings.
I'm getting quite a few comments in now on this topic particularly, and they're saying the same things that we're saying. So I won't read them all out. But I've got one comment here. Parents of young gang members should be blamed for the rise in knife crime around the country as they fail to properly discipline their children. However, there should be a joint effort between the community and the police force. Why are they cutting the funding for the police? Absolutely rightly said. The community and the government need to work together. Now, I've just had a text message in from somebody, and they make a very valid point. We unfortunately live in a society, in a community where sometimes I actually feel sorry for the police officers. We live in a time where a police officer attempts to speak to somebody or attempts to make an arrest, and the person being arrested pulls out his phone and intimidates the police officer by saying, "You are being recorded, officer," which obviously hinders the police officer doing their duty. Do you feel we live in a society now where people no longer have regard for the law or have fear for the law?
I think that the vast majority of citizens in this country do have respect for the law. Plainly, that does not include everyone, sadly. I might add, it doesn't even necessarily include our government, I might add, because as we know, when it comes to proroguing of Parliament or breaches of international law or threats to opt out of human rights or threats to judicial review, which is the ability of individual citizens to hold the government to account. Sadly, I don't think that the current government is setting the best of examples when it comes to compliance with the rule of law. But plainly, as I've said, I have a legal career behind me, 35 years, been studying and practicing law for 41 years. You know, my commitment will always be to access to justice, equality before the law, the rule of law for all and not just for the few. And that's always been my personal and professional commitment for 41 years.
Okay, I've had another comment come in. Yes, it seems to be a shambles at the moment with the community basically out of control. A key issue currently is domestic abuse. Is this a priority? What is being done to tackle domestic abuse with the lockdown and with COVID and people being locked up in their houses? There's been many cases that have gone unreported. What are your plans for domestic abuse?
Yeah, I've always made it very clear. Domestic abuse must be a priority for West Midlands Police, and if I am elected as the Police and Crime Commissioner, it will be. The facts around domestic abuse are truly shocking, and we have to remember that many of the statistics are probably almost certainly an underestimate in reality. I mean, just one statistic. You know, in the year ending March 2019, 1.6 million women experienced domestic abuse. 2.4 million people in total. And of course, behind those statistics are the real lived experience of victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And we know that being a victim of domestic abuse can have catastrophic and devastating consequences, and indeed life-changing consequences for people. And of course, it's not just those victims and survivors, it's often the children who experience indirectly that domestic abuse, which again can have very serious, significant consequences for them as children, young people, and later in life. So it's a huge issue, and I have said it must be a priority. And what I've said about that is that we need to make sure that the police are using all the powers available to them in order to protect the victims of domestic abuse. You know, whether that's making sure that they're imposing bail conditions, whether it's making sure that they arrest for breach of non-molestation orders, they're using domestic violence protection notices and orders, they're imposing restraining orders as well post-conviction. That's really important. I'm a big fan of wanting to extend and promote the network of independent domestic violence advocates. We have a domestic abuse bill that is going through Parliament at the moment, which really does provide an opportunity to significantly change the way we deal with domestic abuse in this country. We're going to have a statutory overarching definition. We're going to have a domestic abuse commissioner. Local authorities are going to have to provide infant and safeguarding for victims of domestic abuse, than many other provisions within that piece of legislation. And of course, another very important role that the Police and Crime Commissioner has is to make sure that there are proper, adequate and tailored victims services, not just for victims of domestic abuse, of course, but certainly that's a key role as well, because obviously we need to make sure that victims of domestic abuse get the right help at the right time, and are able to be given the help and support to be able to recover from the ordeal of domestic abuse. Absolutely key.
Now, you talk about all these things.
I would say finally, we also need to make sure we're investing in robust domestic abuse perpetrator programs as well, because as again, it's a big part of my agenda, which is based on, you know, prevention, early intervention, and dealing with the underlying causes of crime as well.
It appears, I mean, where we are currently at the moment, it does seem a mess. And I speak as being a resident of Birmingham, somebody who's born and raised in Birmingham, somebody who works in the community pretty often. I've even worked with the police. I've been out on the neighborhood watch schemes. I've been out on when they were doing the stop and search. I was out helping officers do that. It just seems at the moment where we are, and that's from a personal perspective, we are in an absolute mess, and it seems that we have lost control. I go back to knife crime and gang crime. I mean, the past week, every single day, there seems to be something happening. You know, gone are the days where hearing about a stabbing was breaking news. Gone are the days where hearing about a murder was breaking news. Today, it seems to be just like the weather. It's just normal. It's no longer a wow factor in it. It just appears that the respect for authority, or the fear of authority, or the fear of punishment is no longer there at all. We appreciate this is a lot of it is drug related. We appreciate a lot of this is down to social deprivation. We appreciate that there's many factors. But in an era when I grew up, you know, if I saw a police officer walking towards me, my heart would skip a few beats. And when I started driving, if there was a police officer coming in front of me or even behind me, I would basically stop breathing because I was that worried about it. In today's era, why is he, whenever you see the police, they find it appropriate to stick a finger up to the police? And I'm not saying that we should be a state of a dictatorship state, but surely there needs to be some level of authority or some level of respect between your public and your law enforcers. And a lot of the comments that are coming in are also speaking about this, that there's just no respect. There's no no respect for authority. And I mean the stats and the news daily. I mean, every single day we're hearing someone's been stabbed, and the victims are getting younger and younger, and the perpetrators are getting younger and younger as well. Carrying a knife in this day and age is nothing anymore. It just means nothing. It's like everyone's carrying a knife, and every day we're hearing of families losing their loved ones, losing their children. It's just becoming crazy. So what I mean, I appreciate you speak about all these initiatives, and all these initiatives are going to take a lot of funding. Have they got the funding in place? Have you got the structure in place? Have you got the resource in place to be able to carry these pledges out?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly we have funding in place in order to increase the current number of police officers that we have in the West Midlands. I mean, between 2020 and 2023, we are going to get an additional 1,200 net increase in police officers in the West Midlands. Now, do bear in mind that between 2010 and 2019, we lost 2,221. So the police officers that are going to replace them between 2020 and 2023 are only 1,200. Now, we're only going to be getting back about 50% of those police officers we lost during that period of time. But, and of course, that's very welcome. But it's equally disappointing because, of course, when it comes to our police officers in the West Midlands, there's no levelling up. And in many respects, we're being shortchanged in the West Midlands by the current Conservative government as a consequence of that. I mean, there are other issues I have with the way the system works concerning local council tax and the funding formula as far as the West Midlands is concerned, because, such a system that we've ended up having to pay more local council tax for less local policing. And we also have a fundamentally unfair funding formula which disproportionately disadvantages the West Midlands as well. I want that changed because it costs the West Midlands about £40 million a year. It's not fair, and we need to sort that out. But in terms of the wider issue around youth violence, so yes, my pledge, that pledge to increase the number of police officers by 1,200 is there. That funding will be there. My pledge in relation to 450 extra community police officers out in the streets of the West Midlands, that pledge will be fully funded within the context of that national uplift. Absolutely. And of course, we do have funding in relation to the violence reduction unit. That is currently in for the next 12 months. Many people may or may not be familiar with the work of the violence reduction unit in the West Midlands, but essentially it is there to undertake essential preventative work around violence. So it's focusing on prevention, early intervention, and the underlying causes of crime. And the funding for that is in place as well. Now, I would much prefer that there were guaranteed funding for, say, a 3-year cycle in relation to the violence reduction unit, as opposed to it just simply being funded year to year, which of course makes it far more difficult to manage key projects around violence reduction. But there you have it. That's the system we have that is currently imposed on the West Midlands by central government at the moment. So yes, we do have the resources. But what I would say around, that kind of issue around lack of respect, yeah, no, I completely understand that. What I would say is that one of the key ways in which we can improve that lack of respect is building trust and confidence between the police and young people and communities and people in the West Midlands. That's absolutely key. We need to rebuild that trust and confidence. And frankly, I think one of the reasons that's been lost is, as I've said before, the fact that community policing was dismantled in the West Midlands. As I mentioned before, we lost over 50% of our community police officers. I do believe that if we're able to reinstate the level of community policing in the West Midlands, that would build trust and confidence, and it would improve respect, because people want visible, preventative, proactive policing. If you've got community police officers out on the streets in communities, it builds trust and confidence, builds relationships, it builds local intelligence.
I'm sorry to cut you in there. A couple of years ago, I dealt with a 13-year-old child who was carrying a knife. I was part of a organization that dealt with the youth, And when I asked him, why are you carrying it? He said it's for protection. And when I said, well, if you need protection, you have the police. And he said, what police? They're never around. And this was the words of a 13-year-old innocent child who felt it necessary to carry a knife to protect himself because the area in which he lived in, the local youth were promoting and encouraging everybody to go out and stab people. Not only stab people, but they were encouraging them to make videos of it. And if they weren't doing that, then they were becoming victims themselves. Now that's a very sad place for a 13-year-old to be. That's a very sad place. And it's a
Yeah, I
reflection
mean,
of where our community is at the moment. And totally, I appreciate by the comments as well that it's a joint effort by the police, by the parents, by the communities. But again, it goes back to law enforcement. If children as young as 13, and as I say, up until about the age of 21, 22, even today, actually, if I've got a police car behind me, I'm absolutely thinking, oh my, and I'm legal, I'm totally legal, I'm insured, I've got MOT, I'm a driver, but you still have this fear. You still have this fear. But unfortunately, today, the youth of today, or the up and coming of today, absolutely no regard. And then they know that once they are confronted by a police officer or a law enforcement officer, they can pull out their phone, and that will then further hinder or intimidate the officer and prevent them from doing their duty to its fullest. Are we doing anything about that? Is there anything, uh, I totally appreciate the community policing. I appreciate the officers trying to get into the community and holding community events, and I've been to quite a few myself. But they don't always give the answer because there's a certain part of the community which is very hard to reach, very hard to get to, and in certain pockets in all communities, which the message is very hard for somebody in a uniform or somebody of authority to get their message to that particular segment or sect of the community. Has all this been taken into consideration?
yeah, I mean, the circumstances which you relate about the 13-year-old knife carrier. Yeah, I mean, it's deeply concerning and disturbing when one hears those stories. I mean, you're right. I think all too often the carrying of knives by children, young people, has become far too prevalent. There's lots of different reasons why people carry knives. I mean, you alluded to the fact that sometimes it's for perceived personal protection, sometimes it's for image of one or another, and sometimes, sadly, it's because they have actually an intention of using them. Always remember that, in my view, a 13-year-old carrying a knife like that is not normal behaviour. I appreciate what you mean by saying it's becoming increasingly normalised, but I mean, it's not normal behaviour as you or I would expect from a 13-year-old. So one always has to drill down into the circumstances around that. I mean, sometimes those children themselves are being criminally exploited, either through county lines. Sometimes they are under severe threats of violence. Sometimes they're carrying knives for other people who are effectively exploiting them, as I say, for criminal purposes, particularly around county lines. So we do have to understand the circumstances in which 13-year-olds end up carrying knives in the first place, if we're going to be able to address the issue and prevent it and deal with it and provide a remedy. We've got to understand what is driving that in the first place, because I don't know about you, but when I grew up, young kids of 13 carrying knives was just, you just never heard of it. It just wasn't something.
Exactly, and that's the worrying thing. There's a notion that the people sitting in the offices are so disconnected from actually what's happening in the community. And I'll be honest, I've felt that on a few occasions as well, because when you're out on the front line, when you're dealing with the youth, when you're dealing with the children, when you're dealing with the victims, when you're dealing with the perpetrators, there does and there has always seemed to be a disconnect. Maybe the people in the offices are it's very easy to sit on there on a desk and pen something out, but actual coming out into the community and engaging with the leading figures of that community to really identify where the problems are. I felt this being a frontline worker sometimes that maybe there is and there has been a disconnect. We talk a very good game. We do talk a fantastic game. But when it comes to delivery, sometimes we fall short. And as a result, the West Midlands is where it is. And it's and it's increasing daily.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry to put you on the spot there, but I mean, this is what I've personally felt.
But this comes back to what I'm saying about community policing. If we're to understand what's going on in the streets, if we need that kind of local intelligence, that trust and confidence, you need community policing in order to do that. Because if you start building trust and confidence through community policing, through visible policing, through police officers who are able to build relationships with local members of the community, they will start to learn and understand what is going on at the grassroots on a street level, and we'll get a better insight and knowledge about those sorts of things. Number one. Number two, youth workers and youth services. Again, that you've got youth workers working on the ground with local communities, embedded in local communities. They get a better understanding about what's going on. People will talk to them about what is going on if you get to know them. And that's why rebuilding community policing and youth services is so crucial to this strategy. It's absolutely key. And I would say as well, from my own point of view, police and crime, I've always said that it's absolutely fundamental to this role that I want to be a people and communities police and crime commissioner. And what I mean by that is a police and crime commissioner who engages with, listens to, and works with the community around these issues. My vision of the role is not a police and crime commissioner who is sat behind a desk in Lloyd House. Okay, that is not my vision of the role. I want to be out and about, visible myself, and accountable to local communities, I might add, and in working with, engaging with, and listening to the communities. So, give you an example. Recently, I've been doing quite a lot of work with Birmingham Says No to Knife Crime, for example, and I've held some live Facebook sessions with them. I've held a session with young people who've got a lot of lived experience of these sorts of issues. I've had a couple of sessions in the last 2 or 3 weeks with people who are engaged in work around these matters, both at the what you might call the high end of gang and youth violence, people who are working with those who are embedded in the system at kind of quite a high level, who are already involved, and also those who are working with young people who are perhaps at risk of becoming involved in that kind of lifestyle. And I've met a lot of these people, and I've been talking to them about what we do in terms of understanding these issues. As you say, it's very easy to be sat in a desk.
You see. I think the thing is, and what the general feeling is, once they get to a certain age, they've gone beyond help. Early intervention, a key a phrase that you've mentioned, I think is key. Once they've hit a certain age, or they've gone so far down that road, it can be a point of no return. And at that point, the police service or the police force is going to be doing nothing but just arresting them. Early intervention, community cohesion, getting faces out into the community, into the schools, into the places of worship, into the communal focus centers is absolutely essential. I went out with the Spark Book team when they were doing the stop and search, and we were walking down the Stratford Road, the Somalian part of Stratford Road, where it's predominantly the Somalian community. And it wasn't up until that point when I was informed that West Mids Police didn't have no Somalian officers. And I remember we walked into a couple of the cafes there, and I engaged with them because I was just a normal lad, and we managed to recruit a couple of individuals there and then to go out on the street watch. Now, it's initiatives like that because you need diversity within the force, and particularly on your initiatives like Street Watch, which I think was a great initiative, but maybe needed a bit more representation from the from the wider communities. And I mean, there's so many comments coming in. I just can't. But I think it needs to be a job hand in hand, and the police possibly need to be more of a friendly face within the community as well as a figure of authority, but certainly not a institution that should be laughed at or should be mocked or should be made fun of. And that element of respect or I wouldn't say fear, but the element of respect certainly needs to be upheld and maintained.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I've said, part of my strategy will always, the starting point for my strategy will always be around prevention, because the prevention of crime is always better than having to deal with the consequences of crime. You know, and I'll never tire of repeating the mantra. It's prevention, prevention, prevention. That always has to be the starting point. Now, you're absolutely right. Obviously, for one reason or another, you know, there are people who are embedded in organised gang crime, county lines, and you know, sometimes, obviously, for whatever reason, prevention and early intervention and addressing the underlying cause hasn't worked for them, for whatever reason. So, you know, we need to be flexible. We need to have a strategy that deals with critical intervention as well to deal with those people. But most importantly as well, we need to have rehabilitation, because, you know, no matter how
Yes.
embedded in organised gang crime or counter lines people are capable of rehabilitation. And if we have effective mechanisms in place to do that, it's a win-win situation. Because what we don't want happening is people who have got caught up in that and who then perhaps ultimately pay the penalty of going to prison. We don't want them coming out and then just repeating the cycle all over again. And unfortunately, you know, rates of reoffending are far, far, far too high. We don't do rehabilitation very well in this country. You know, for adults who go to prison, there's about a 47% reoffending rate. For those people who go to prison for 12 months, it's about 60%. Those
Wow.
youth justice system, about 75% for the youth justice system. We don't do rehabilitation well enough. And frankly, we need to do it better, because that's one very effective way of breaking the cycle of crime. We do not want people going to prison, coming out and just repeating the whole process all over again, because it just has a huge impact on rising crime, victims of crime, an impact on the policing service, the criminal justice system, public services increase. You know,
I've actually heard of communities where going to prison is actually a badge of honor. And in some communities, if they haven't been to prison, they haven't yet become a man. And this is
Yeah,
very, very unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate.
of course that there is that. I mean, but you know, I've met people recently who have gone to prison, served time, they've come out and they have rehabilitated. You know,
Yes.
I've met a couple of individuals in the last couple of weeks who are prime examples of that, and who've now turned their lives around, and who are actually, you know, now engaging in youth work, mentoring, explaining to young people what the consequences of their actions will be at the end of the day. And you know, and
Yes.
those people have a powerful story to tell around mentoring and you know, explaining to young people their story. And you know, that level of lived experience also has to be really central to a strategy of dealing with these things, because quite often those people can communicate better with those young people who are at risk of, or who are currently embedded in gang crime, than, you know, you or I are ever going to be able to do. So that's very important. You know, we must always make sure that those with lived experience who've come through and have rehabilitated and turned their lives around, and you know, and really use those people as mentors and examples of what can be achieved. Because, you know, I mean, okay, there may well be examples, but I do believe that you know, the vast majority of people are capable of turning their lives around in those circumstances and rehabilitation.
Definitely. So the Police and Crime Commissioner, who actually votes for the Police and Crime Commissioner? Is it the public, or is it MPs, or who is it?
Right. Well, the Police and Crime Commissioner is elected by the people of the West Midlands. The same people who elect their local councillors, the same people who elect their local MPs. So within the West Midlands, everyone who is registered for a vote on the electoral register will be entitled to vote on the 6th of May, not only for the Police and Crime Commissioner, but for the Metro Mayor. And of course, if they've got local council elections, their local councillors as well. And do bear in mind that you know, the West Midlands, as we know, is a vast area. I think we've got nearly 2 million people on the who are eligible to vote in the Police and Crime Commissioner and Metro Mayor elections. And of course, covers for those people who may or may not be aware, you know, it covers Wolverhampton, Walsall, Sandwell, Dudley, Coventry, Birmingham, Solihull, the 7 conurbations of the West Midlands Combined Authority.
And how important is change right now? Because we're coming out of a pandemic, we're coming into a time when there's going to be a lot of uncertainty anyway, and austerity and uncertainty always increases crime anyway. We're at a very critical part of everything, really, because you know the last 12 months have been detrimental. They've been devastating. We've had loss of life. We've had loss of economy. We've had people's mental health is in a very, very bad place. And now that we're coming out, undoubtedly people are going to face more and more financial hardship, more and more struggles. Yes, we're coming out of lockdown. However, you know, it's the dawn of another problem, which is financial issues and the whole piece about coming out of lockdown. How important is change right now? And what are your, if I were to say, 5 pledges to what's different from today to when and if you are elected? What would be different?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Abid. There are some enormous challenges facing policing at the moment. Number one, we've had 10 years of austerity in terms of cuts to policing and all of the challenges that has thrown up. We've had cuts to essential preventative public services in terms of youth services, mental health services, drug and alcohol addiction services, all the knock-on consequences that that's had on, you know, in terms of impact on policing. We've had a government that frankly has created a defective and dysfunctional criminal justice system as well. And for me, there's never been a better time to care about policing, crime, and our criminal justice system at the moment. I really do think people really need to care who is going to be representing them as their Police and Crime Commissioner on the 6th of May, as their democratically elected and directly accountable Police and Crime Commissioner. I mean, and to name just a few challenges, as you've just alluded to in your question there. Number one, yes, I mean, COVID-19 presents a huge challenge to policing. We've got many children who've missed out on school. We've got unemployment rates, poverty, and inequality that is going to be exacerbated as a consequence of that. You know, we risk seeing a spike in crime due to that as well. We've got, you know, social consequences that will flow from that. We've got the challenges around violent crime and increases in knife crime. We've got 2 particular issues that have risen in the last 12 months. You know, we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course we had the fallout around concern around Black Lives Matter and ensuring that we have a police service that is representative of the community that it serves. And I might just add, just as an adjunct to that, one way of building trust and confidence, of course, which is one of the themes that we've been talking about for the past 50 minutes or so. One of the ways in which we do that is we build a police service that is representative of the communities that it serves. Because you're right, diversity inclusion is absolutely key to that strategy. Absolutely key. You know, and although West Midlands Police made some advances in relation to that in recent years. There's still not a police service that is representative of the communities that it serves, and we need to change that. Number one, that's really important. We need to make sure that at the very forefront of West Midlands Police, it's about eliminating any unlawful discrimination. It's about advancing equality of opportunity and fostering good community relations. That's absolutely key. We had the tragic death of Sarah Everard in the last month or so, and that absolutely has served notice on all of us to have to redouble our efforts around the need to combat violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, which is something else we talked about earlier. That's absolutely key. For me, community policing is definitely something I want to do differently. I want to strengthen and rebuild the infrastructure around community policing in the West Midlands, because I think, if there was just one thing, and to pick one thing is invidious in one sense, because there are so many big issues that need to be dealt with. But if there was perhaps one thing that I felt would make the single biggest difference in relation to all of those issues, it would be strengthening and rebuilding community policing. And that's why I've made that pledge around 450 extra community police officers out in the streets to keep people safe and secure, because we do need that proactive, preventative, problem-solving, visible community policing. I think that can make a big difference on so many different levels.
How, and I mean, as we are running out of time, but I think a question that's always been raised. Communities are always wanting to say their piece, and sometimes we do it in the way of protest or petitioning, and I think as a community sometimes we do things a bit too late. How important is it for us as a community to air our views and opinions and suggestions beforehand, before any laws are passed or before there's any changes? And how can we do that? Because I think as a community, particularly being from the BEM community, sometimes we're a bit reluctant to say something, or we're a bit shy to come forward. And then afterwards we moan. Afterwards, when things have happened, then we start going on social media and making noises which are sometimes too late. How important is it for the community to engage with yourselves and have the voice heard? And is it really that easy as well?
Well, look, you're absolutely right. Community engagement is absolutely crucial. And that's why, I come back to the fact that that's why I've always made it very clear I want to be a People and Communities Police and Crime Commissioner, because I realise the central core importance of ensuring that a Police and Crime Commissioner is engaging with, listening to, and working with kids. But that has to be a two-way process, of course. And I will welcome that community engagement. One of the issues that I'm keen on doing is looking at ways that we can improve that level of community engagement. Whether that, there's lots of different ways that we can do that. But I'm interested in ensuring that we can perhaps improve the level of participation by people and communities around the West Midlands insofar as the Police and Crime Commissioner role is concerned. And one of the suggestions that I made around that, is that if elected, I would want to engage with community surgeries around the West Midlands, number one. Number two, community walkabouts, I think, is good in terms of improving visibility. I'd encourage people to get involved, obviously, with their street watch or their neighbourhood watch. Get involved with their independent advisory group. Get involved with their Force Area Association, for example, because get involved in the community scrutiny panels, around stop and search and use of force, for example. That's really important.
Yes.
And one proposed initiative I've got is potentially working up or devising kind of area panels or area forums that I'd be interested in working on, so that we can promote kind of community engagement, consultation and communication. I think that's absolutely key. And of course, that all comes back to building that level of trust and confidence. We've got to make sure, and of course, in this country, we always say we police by consent, don't we? That's absolutely key.
Yes.
We police by, that's always a fundamental principle of policing in this country. We've got to make sure that policing, as far as possible, is something that is done with people, not to people. I think that's very important.
Yes, Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure. We are out of time, unfortunately. I'm hoping to get the same slot again next week for yourself, and hopefully we'll have Liam Byrne on the show as well. But it's been very very informative. We wish you the very very best of luck, and if people are thinking about who to vote for and are on the line and on sitting on the fence in 30 seconds, what would you want to say to them?
Okay. Well, I would just say thanks ever so much for the invitation, opportunity to come and speak to you. As I've said, I want to be a people and community commissioner. That's putting communication right at the very forefront. What I would say is we need a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who's going to hold the current government to account for their appalling record over the last 10 years. A Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who's committed to community policing, understands the need for, yes, robust policing, but equally the need for prevention, because the prevention of crime is always better than having to deal with the consequences of crime, and a police and crime commissioner who is fundamentally committed to justice, safety and security for all of our people and communities of the West Midlands.
Simon, many, many thanks and best of luck. And hopefully next week, I think we only have one more weekend. Yeah. So hopefully we will try and get you back on next week. Many thanks for joining us. Have a fab day.
Yeah, and you, and to all your viewers and listeners too. All the best.
Thank you. And viewers, it's been an absolute pleasure. Many thanks for your interaction this morning. I've had some amazing comments, and we will be sharing this stream out again over the past week on all social media platforms. Please do make sure you share it. And many thanks for tuning in. Keep tuned into our network. Throughout the week, we have some amazing shows, some political shows, sports shows, talk shows. I know it's Ramadan. I know times are hard, but keep tuned in. We will keep you entertained throughout the day. Until next time, and see you next time, next Sunday, same time, same place. Until then, be safe. See you next week.